Voyage to go, history. Life is a journey, being part of it is everything. Hello, my name is Jessica. Welcome to episode 10 of my historical travel podcast, Voyage to go, history, where I take you on the most adventurous journeys from the past that continue to shape our view of the world today. In this first historical journey that I want to tell you about, we accompany young Georg Forster on his voyage around the world with Captain Cook in the second half of the 18th century. Georg Forster was born in 1754 near Gdansk and emigrated to London with his father in 1766 when he was 11 years old. In 1772, the British Admiralty made a spontaneous offer to Georg's father, the scientist Reinhold Forster, to join the upcoming second voyage of James Cook to the South Seas to compile a scientific report about the journey and to publish it upon their return. The father agreed on the condition that his 17-year-old son, Georg, could accompany them as a draftsman and scientific assistant. After more than 3 years, they returned from this journey. At the age of 23, Georg published the English version of his travel narrative in London under the captivating title A Voyage Round the World. The travel report became one of the most fascinating books of its time. Not only did it mark the beginning of the modern travel literature, but it also stood out in both content and style from other accounts of Cook's groundbreaking explorations, offering a captivating diversity of the unusual. His book had a strong influence on many later ethnologists. Forster's narratives and reflections are always focused on the foundations of humanity, with a particular emphasis on the fascinating social behavior of individuals and groups of people. So, in the upcoming episodes of this podcast, let us dive into the depths of this literary adventure, sailing not only around the world, but also exploring the essence of humanity. Georg's travel narrative is written in the language of the 18th century. To make it more understandable, I have largely translated it into modern English. Forster's knowledge is that of the second half of the 18th century. So in the Voyage to Go History podcast, I will occasionally provide additional information and assistance. What happened in the last episode?
In the last episode, the crew of the HMS Resolution faced the relentless cold of the Southern Ocean as they pushed deeper into Antarctic waters. Fresh storms and heavy snowfall drove them westward, raising hopes of finding land as seals and penguins reappeared. Yet their expectations were soon dashed, forcing them to accept the uncertainty of their search. The frozen expanse remained a constant challenge. They reached a massive ice island surrounded by drifting fragments. With the weather calm, they launched a boat to collect ice, melting it for drinking water. Though the ice water was pure, many crew members developed swollen glands, a phenomenon known from mountainous regions where snowmelt is the primary water source. One of the great marvels of the voyage occurred at night when towering columns of bright white light illuminated the southern sky. The aurora australis shimmered above them, stretching toward the zenith and sometimes bending at the tips. Unlike the northern lights, these lacked the fiery reds and purples seen in the Arctic. The ghostly glow was a stark reminder of the unseen forces at work in these remote latitudes. However, the crew's morale was shaken by a devastating event. In thick fog, they lost sight of their companion ship, the Adventure. They fired cannons and lit signal fires, but no response came. Soon, they had to accept the grim reality. The ships had been separated. Now alone in the vast and hostile Southern Ocean, the men felt the weight of their isolation. With no hope of rescue should disaster strike, every iceberg and storm became a greater threat. As they pressed onward, they encountered immense ice fields stretching beyond the horizon. The sea turned eerily smooth, waves stilled by a dense layer of fragmented ice. Despite the risks, they pushed forward until Cook made a fateful decision. Seeing no sign of land and facing an impenetrable wall of ice, he ordered the ship to turn back.
Sunday, January 24th, 1773, Southern Ocean.
As they reached approximately the 62nd degree of southern latitude and encountered another massive ice field, the captain decided, to the great relief of everyone aboard, not to venture further south for the time being. They had been at sea for an extended period without fresh supplies. The season for exploration in this frigid region was nearly over, and the weather grew harsher daily, giving them a foretaste of how dreadful the winter in these seas must be. The nights had also grown significantly longer, making navigation increasingly perilous. It was natural that the sailors, worn down by the grueling voyage and a lack of nutritious food, longed for a place of rest and refreshment. They were immensely relieved to leave behind a region where such comfort seemed unattainable. Nonetheless, they remained in these icy waters until the 17th of the following month, navigating alternately between the 61st and 58th degrees of southern latitude while continuing to sail eastward. During this time, they encountered frequent east winds, often accompanied by fog and rain, which repeatedly placed them in clear danger of crashing against the towering icebergs. The shapes of these ice formations were mostly peculiar and, due to their fragmented appearance, often strikingly picturesque. Among them was one of extraordinary size, with a grotto-like hole running through its center, allowing the daylight to shine through from the other side. Some were shaped like church towers, while others left their imagination free to interpret them as they pleased, providing a diversion from the monotony that had begun to dominate their days. The sight of seabirds, porpoises, seals, and whales had long since lost its novelty. Despite their effective preventatives, especially the sauerkraut, several crew members began to show severe symptoms of scurvy. These included inflamed gums, difficulty breathing, blue spots, rashes, limb paralysis, and greenish fatty filaments in their urine. They were prescribed fresh malt infusion, which cured some completely and provided partial relief to others from this dreadful illness. The harsh climate also took a toll on the sheep they had brought from the Cape of Good Hope. They became mangy, wasted away to skin and bones, and nearly stopped eating entirely. Their goats and pigs gave birth, but the offspring were either stillborn due to the stormy conditions or quickly succumbed to the cold. It became evident from these converging circumstances that it was time to leave the higher southern latitudes and seek a harbor where they could refresh the crew and save the few remaining sheep, meant as gifts for the inhabitants of the South Sea Islands.
Tuesday, March 16, 1773, Southern Ocean.
Around the 58th degree of southern latitude, the sea glowed at night, which seemed remarkable given the high latitude and cold climate. However, the glow was not as intense as at the Cape. It appeared only as scattered sparks. At midday, the thermometer measured 33.5 degrees Fahrenheit, 0.8 degrees Celsius, and on the nights of the 16th and 19th, the southern lights appeared again. This time, the light columns formed an arch across the entire sky and shone brighter than ever before. At this point, they finally began steering northeast toward the southern end of New Zealand, as previously mentioned. Along this route, they encountered strong winds and frequently saw seaweed, particularly rockweed, as well as many storm and seabirds. Among these, a group of large gray gulls caught their attention as they hunted a great white albatross. Despite the albatross's long wings, it couldn't escape the gulls. Once they caught up, they targeted its vulnerable belly, evidently knowing where it was least able to defend itself. The albatross's only defense was to land on the water, where its formidable beak seemed to keep the gulls at bay. These gulls were strong and predatory, known to tear lambs apart on the Faroe Islands and carry the pieces to their nests. Albatrosses, on the other hand, appeared less aggressive and mostly fed on small sea creatures, especially mollusks and jellyfish. As they sailed north past the 50th degree of southern latitude, the number of albatrosses increased significantly. In contrast, only a few solitary ones had ventured as far south as their voyage, suggesting that these birds primarily lived under more temperate skies. The farther north they sailed, the more seals came toward them from the coast of New Zealand. On the 25th, they saw a tree trunk and several clumps of grass floating by, sights that reinvigorated the crew's spirits. Shortly afterward, they spotted land to the northeast. Although it seemed distant at first, by 5 p.m., with the aid of favorable winds, they were only a few miles from a rugged, rocky coastline. The coast featured several openings that promised a spacious bay or sound, with towering mountains visible further inland. As they approached the coast, they used the lead line but found no bottom at 30 fathoms, 55 meters, 180 feet. Unexpectedly, the lookout on the mast suddenly shouted that they were close to rocky cliffs. In great haste, they turned the ship around. At the same time, the weather turned dark and rainy, so they moved away from the land for safety. The following morning, they discovered that the land ahead was the southernmost point of New Zealand, beyond Cape West. This part of the country had not been explored by Captain Cook during his previous voyage on the Endeavour. Here ended their first journey into the high southern latitudes. They had spent 4 months and 2 days without seeing land. Despite this, they were protected by Providence, guided safely through many dangers, and, with few exceptions, remained in good health. This was particularly remarkable, given the relentless hardships they faced on their voyage from the Cape of Good Hope to New Zealand. These challenges were unprecedented and unexperienced by anyone before them. Their sails were torn, and their rigging was in pieces. The ship was either violently tossed by waves or laid over on its side by fierce winds. The relentless work of the sailors in the rigging made the cabins and upper deck unstable and treacherous. The terrifying storms, which George Anson's historian had described in vivid and harrowing detail, were among their lesser troubles. On top of this, they contended with the harshness of an exceptionally rough climate. Sailors and officers alike were constantly exposed to rain, hail, or snow. The ropes and rigging were coated in ice, and working with them left hands frozen and bloodied. Their supply of fresh water had to be replenished with melted sea ice, a task that often resulted in frost-bitten fingers. They lived in constant fear of crashing into towering masses of ice that filled the vast southern ocean. Such dangers arose swiftly and repeatedly, leaving the crew little time for rest. They often had to abandon their sleeping hours to help the watch and manage the ship with constant vigilance, or turn it with the utmost speed. Adding to these hardships was the pervasive gloom of the Antarctic sky. For weeks, they were shrouded in impenetrable fog, rarely glimpsing the uplifting sight of the sun. This alone could depress even the most resolute and spirited among them. Their fishing lines and hooks, distributed as early as November, had been useless. The ocean in these higher latitudes was bottomless, and no fish appeared, only whales. This was unsurprising. It is well known that in deep open seas, far from shores or sandbanks, fishing is only fruitful in tropical regions. Thus, the long period spent on the open sea without seeing land or enjoying any kind of refreshment was, in truth, nothing short of a continuous chain of toil and misery. It is a clear testament to divine providence that they suffered none of the severe consequences that might have been expected from such extensive and accumulated hardships.
Friday, March 26, 1773, Dusky Bay, New Zealand.
After a journey of 122 days, during which they had covered approximately 6,480 kilometers, 3,500 nautical miles, in open sea, they finally arrived in Dusky Bay at noon. This bay, located on the northern side of Cape West, had already been discovered and named by Captain Cook on his previous voyage in the Endeavour, though he had not visited it himself. Eager to drop anchor as soon as possible, they hoped to do so right at the bay's entrance. However, the lead line indicated an excessive depth of 73 meters, 40 fathoms, and further ahead, no bottom was found, even at 110 meters, 60 fathoms. Thus, they had no choice but to sail much farther into the bay. The weather was pleasant, and compared to what they had endured so far, refreshingly warm. Gentle breezes carried them past numerous rocky islands, all covered with trees and dense shrubbery. The varied shades of dark evergreen foliage blended beautifully with the autumn-tinted leaves of other trees, creating a picturesque contrast. Large flocks of water birds animated the rocky shores, and the land echoed with the wild songs of the forest's feathered inhabitants. The longer they had longed for land and fresh vegetation, the more this sight enchanted them. The expressions of deep satisfaction brought on by this new scene were clearly visible in everyone's eyes. At 3 p.m, they finally dropped anchor under the tip of an island. Here they were somewhat sheltered from the open sea and so close to the shore that a rope could reach it. As soon as the ship was secured, the sailors cast their fishing lines. Within moments, they hauled up a great number of excellent fish from all sides of the ship. The sight of this promising catch greatly increased their joy over their safe arrival in the bay. The fish had an excellent taste, and since they had gone so long without fresh food, this first meal in New Zealand seemed like the finest they had ever had. For dessert, their eyes delighted in the wilderness before them, a landscape that even Salvator Rosa could not have painted more beautifully.
Salvator Rosa was an Italian Baroque painter of the 17th century known for his dark, dramatic landscapes and rebellious artistic style. Unlike his contemporaries, he depicted wild, untamed nature with jagged mountains, twisted trees, and stormy skies. His paintings often carried a melancholic and romantic tone, highlighting nature's raw power.
It was entirely in the style of this artist. Rocks crowned with forests, their age seemingly dating back to times before the Great Flood, with waterfalls crashing down in foaming torrents between them. Yet such grandeur was hardly necessary to enchant them. After such a long absence from land, even the bleakest coastline could have seemed like the most magnificent place on earth. And from this perspective, one must also view the passionate descriptions of the wild cliffs of Juan Fernandez and the impenetrable forests of Tinian.
Juan Fernandez and the impenetrable forests of Tinian refers to 2 remote islands known for their dense vegetation and significance in maritime exploration. The Juan Fernandez Islands off the coast of Chile gained fame as the place where Alexander Selkirk was marooned, inspiring Robinson Crusoe. These rugged islands were difficult to navigate due to their steep terrain and thick forests. Tinian, part of the Northern Mariana Islands, was another crucial stop for 18th century explorers, valued for its fresh water and food supplies.
Right after the meal, 2 boats were sent out to explore different areas of the bay, primarily to find a secure harbor for the ship, as their current anchorage was open, uncomfortable, and only suitable for the moment. They took this opportunity to conduct natural history observations and split up to make the most of their discoveries. Both parties found safe and well-sheltered harbors, as well as an abundance of wood and water. Everywhere they went, they encountered so many fish and water birds that they had no reason to fear a shortage of food, no matter how long they stayed.
This concludes part 10 of Georg Forster's journey around the world aboard the HMS Resolution under the command of James Cook. I have linked a map of the locations of this episode in the show notes. For those who would like to see the locations of the journey around the world on the present day, I recommend my YouTube channel, Voyage to Go. There, I visit the places from Georg Forster's travel narrative and try to uncover traces and connections between today and the past. So that was episode 10 of our journey around the world with Georg Forster, Captain Cook and the HMS Resolution, on which we will continue our travels together in the coming weeks. I hope we can travel a little further together, because life is a journey. Being part of it is everything.